Good morning, everyone. Looks like we may still have a couple of attendees trickling in, but it looks like most folks are here. So good morning, welcome. I'm Rebecca Auger, the president of the Connecticut chapter of the American Planning Association. And I just wanted to give a brief welcome and thank you to Jean Davies, Evan Seaman, and the rest of our program committee for putting together this series from the ground up, which is a deep dive into housing issues in Connecticut. As we all know, especially from activity up at the General Assembly yesterday, this is a very hot issue. And this series does an excellent job of pulling together a variety of perspectives on the issue, and you will see that especially today. So I wanted to say thank you to the program committee as well as to Robinson and Cole for sponsoring and helping us out with this series. And I'm really excited for today's presentation. And I just want to remind you that there will be 2 more workshops coming up in June. And with that, I will turn it over to Jean. Jean, you are.
Hi, good morning, everyone. We are happy to see all of you. Evan sent me the list yesterday as we were seeking who was going to moderate, and we're overwhelmed by the number of people who registered for the program. So clearly we are hot on a topic here for Connecticut, as Rebecca noted. So one thing that we are looking at is we're looking at our 4 speakers today. The first is Terry Clark. She is the executive director of the Connecticut Academy of Science and Engineering, or CASE, as it's also well known. It's a nonprofit chartered group. It was done by special act of the General Assembly, and CASE is a nonprofit institution that's patterned after the National Academy of Sciences. It's a wonderful organization. I encourage you to visit their website. There's numerous studies. I've worked with CASE in various aspects of my career, and they're a phenomenal resource. It is, they identify issues and study technological advances that are or should be of a concern to the state of Connecticut. And since joining CASE, Terry has been involved in all aspects of its work, and today she'll be presenting in particular on the Connecticut disparity study that they did for us. Thank you for joining us, Terry.
All right, just give me a minute to share content. Jean, you'll just go through each introduction as they come? Yeah, okay,
correct.
Thank you. Okay, I'm hopeful everyone can see that and that you can hear me okay. If you can't, just share that information and somebody will interrupt me, so thank you. So again, I'm Terry Clark. I'm with Connecticut Academy of Science and Engineering, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk to the Connecticut chapter of the American Planning Association Forum on Housing. As Jean mentioned, Connecticut Academy was brought into being in 1976 by special act of the General Assembly. We're both an honorific organization. Right now, we have 430 members that come from business and industry and academia around the state. They are required to be elected, and it is a rigorous process. On a yearly basis, we conduct the election. And on the other side, we're service-oriented. So our members, member networks, and others are involved with us in conducting studies as requested by the General Assembly and state agencies. So that's us. In 2012, we were asked by the General Assembly to conduct a disparity study. And at the time, we were not familiar with disparity studies, and this is not unusual for the Academy. We do get involved into areas in which staff, myself, do not necessarily understand the content of the area that we're being asked to investigate, but our members do. So a disparity study is conducted, and they're conducted at the federal level, state level, municipal level, regional level, so all different areas, but conducted to see how well a particular program that entity has put in place to reduce discrimination in state contracting, use of state contracting for whatever entity they're looking at. So in Connecticut, our program in Connecticut focuses on minority and women-owned business enterprises. So what the state was interested in is seeing the degree to which there still remains discrimination in the marketplace so that they could adjust the amount of state contracting that might be going out to women and small minority business enterprises. So the language in the legislation, which asked us to conduct the study, is there for you to take a look at. There's a lot of aspects of this study that don't deal with housing. I'll focus on the aspects that do, but I'll also put that in context for how we got to the housing. So I'm going to describe it a little bit. So the Academy, first of all, conducted 3 or 4 phases of the Connecticut Disparity Study. We did not complete the study. It ended up being phased out because the data that was necessary in order to conduct the statistical analysis to determine the amount of discrimination occurring within the marketplace was very difficult to get at. A lot of the data was not electronic. So in order to do that, there were some aspects of the study we were able to conduct early on, beginning in 2012, and other aspects that we could not conduct until we were either in that position or there would have to be an increase in the amount of our contract to allow us to go in and physically look at manual data and then use that in order to identify the amount of discrimination within the marketplace. Ours was a particularly big study in many areas across the country and regions. These studies might just focus on a particular aspect of state contracting, like construction, which happens to be a big aspect, and may only focus on one agency, such as Department of Transportation. In our case, the study included all branches of state government in all areas of procurement. So I'll describe the phases of the study. We'll talk about phase 3, which includes some data on home ownership, with home ownership being the biggest source of income to assist a small minority business or women-owned business to start their business and then to maintain their business. So the aspects of the disparity study, the phases that we conducted, began with a review and analysis of the program within the state, the legal issues, and also anecdotal information analysis. So we had different groups of large and small businesses come in and speak with us. The second phase focused on a recommendation that suggested the state acquire a diversity data management system. This would allow the state to better monitor the program and adjust the amount of contracting to better comply with the goal of reducing discrimination. Phase 3 is what we'll talk about. More specifically with phase 3, we'll talk about disparities in home ownership, which is the interest of this group. We did, in order to do that, though, have to approximate the geographic marketplace within Connecticut. Where does Connecticut get its contractors? Where does the state get its contractors? And you'll see, I'll provide you in just a bit, a little bit of information about that. And as I said, the final phase was not conducted, but it should be of interest right now, and you may want to follow this. The state is looking at conducting another disparity study and actually completing that disparity study. And in thinking about that, they are reducing to phases the areas that they'll focus the disparity study on. I think they're talking about first starting with construction. I don't know if this will go through both the House and Senate, but there are bills in both chambers, and they are on the calendar, though have not yet been called. So I'm not sure what will happen with that. But this is the final phase, and the final phase is where the availability in the geographic marketplace is calculated, and the amount of utilization of minority and women-owned businesses is identified. And through that, the amount or percentage of state contracting can be adjusted. So if the discrimination is more significant than what it was felt, then they can increase the amount of state contracting for minority and women-owned business enterprises, or the reverse. If it's less than what they anticipated, then they can reduce. We had a research team in place, and I just want to mention that. And although she is not listed on this, in the early days of this particular study, a speaker that will be coming up on the agenda, Michelle Reardon, was a member of the research team. We always identify a research team that has knowledge of the particular topic that can conduct the research that is needed for the study. And in this case, we turned to Connecticut Economic Resource Center, which is now known as Advanced CT. And this was the team that assisted us, that had the capability of doing the type of work that we needed in order to conduct the study. We also reached out to Evolution Enterprises of Richard Pierce. Richard had been involved on the ground in disparity studies, both for the Metropolitan Water District here in Connecticut, as well as, I believe he was involved in the disparity study that was conducted in New Haven. You can see I'm on the list. This goes back a ways. Since then, my former boss has retired, and Ann Bertini has gone on to do other things. But I am still here, and I've been here during the whole progress of this particular study. I also named Colette Holt, who was an advisor, and she really developed the model for these type of studies. And this was a study committee we put in place, which we always do with studies. The study committee provides us guidance and oversight, and they come from all different areas of the particular study topic. So in this particular case, they came from, as you can see, the Black Connecticut Alliance and Connecticut Parent Union, Lil Snyder, who was still down in New Haven, program manager for their program in New Haven, Lois McLaughlin, who ran the construction fund program for the SUNY system in New York, the director of constituent services for Congressman Hines. This is just very typical. So it brings in a wide range of thinking that can help to advise us as we're moving through the study. And we always have a couple of our case study reviewers participate to make sure that the study is the quality of what we would expect of a case study. And now this is the part that I think is more interesting for you, which is getting into the evidence of marketplace disparities, which was phase 3 of the study. So we approximated the state's geographic marketplace. The state gets its contractors from Connecticut, from the region, and the United States and beyond. And we also, in phase 3, looked at an analysis of economy-wide disparities, including in business formation, earnings, credit access, of interest to this group, home ownership, and business performance. I'll start with a brief statement of primary conclusion, which is statistically significant disparities were found for both minorities and women across a number of the indicators that I just mentioned. The size of the disparities found depended on the indicator we were looking at, the marketplace, Connecticut region, US, and race, ethnicity, and gender group. And these are the detailed findings. So first, for approximately, this is just FYI for you, 64.5% of the state's procurement is within the state, within Connecticut contractors. 77.9% of the total is within the region, with the remainder beyond. For the economy-wide disparities, we conducted statistical analysis of race and gender disparities in the private marketplace. And for each analysis, we reviewed existing literature, developed statistical model based on other disparity studies in the academic literature. So we looked at other things. We wanted to make sure that the way that we were designing what we were designing compared to other disparity studies and good practice. And we used regression analysis to compare the impacts of different factors on each outcome, holding other factors constant. So, for instance, if we reduce all the noise in the data, we can come down to the point where we can give an indication that, yes, we believe this is the result of discrimination, which is the purpose for using the regression analysis. Sorry about that. I was having trouble progressing. I included these slides in the presentation. I hope you'll be able to get these slides, but if you're unable to get the slides, you can just email me. My information is at the end. I thought you might be interested in seeing the data that we got in these sections, but I won't focus on them. So the disparities in business formation, the disparities in earnings that we uncovered, the disparities in credit access, and now the disparities in home ownership. And I blew this section out a little bit than what I originally had in the presentation. So the research shows that personal wealth is linked to entrepreneurship. If you have the assets, you have the wealth, you're able to start your own business. And most American households, their largest asset is their home. Home ownership provides the equity that can be used to start the business, but it is also used to sustain the business. So home ownership becomes important. The research shows the empirical evidence that minorities and women face unique barriers to home ownership, including discrimination in the real estate market and differential treatment in the mortgage credit market. And it's interesting to know, I just heard yesterday a story on NPR, which I provide the link to. And within that story from NPR, there was reference to a Brookings series on discriminatory housing practices for Black Americans. But the upshot of the NPR article was a woman she was in a traditional Black community, had purchased a home for $100,000 about 4 years ago, and put a lot of effort and resources into upgrading the home. And her daughter was looking for property, and she was looking to help her daughter. So she went to look for a mortgage that she could take out against the property so that she could help her daughter. It would provide her the money to give to her daughter to purchase. And was shocked to find that the house was appraised for $125,000. She expected more. So she went to another lender and found the same, or a little bit less. And then she went to another lender, but with this other lender, she did something different. She did not report her race and gender. And when she did not report her race, all of a sudden her property was appraised at about $250,000. So she is reporting that to HUD, and the reporter indicated that HUD has been looking into this more aggressively than they have in the past. But this is just an example. Her ability, her staying with it and going to a number of lenders and then hiding her race increased the value of her property and what she was able to take out of it. Certainly the same is true if somebody is looking to use their property to support a business. There are home ownership gaps for minorities and women. These type of gaps for minorities and women have decreased over time, but still exist. I would caution you on this statement. This was a statement we made in 2016. And there's been a lot of things that have changed in the world. We think the trends and what the data that will show you are probably pretty similar or even deepen the gap. So I'm not sure how much this phrase is true, but just understand we haven't conducted that research since 2016. But would assume that women are having more challenges based on what we're hearing right now, as well as minorities. We've had the recession, we had the fiscal pullback of the state, and then we had COVID. So a number of things just to keep in the back of your mind when I'm showing this data. So statistical analysis, what we did is we used a descriptive analysis of rates of home ownership and average home value. That data came from the Census Bureau American Community Survey from 2008 until 2015. This shows you the percentage of the population owning or buying a home. It's done on working age population from 25 to 55 years old. And again, American Community Survey. We're reporting Connecticut, regional, and United States. You can see within Connecticut and across the United States, the difference between male and female is not huge. However, when you're looking at race, to really point out a significant disparity, you see white at 79.5%. That's working age population, 25 to 55, owning or buying a home. Black at 44%. Then if you look at Hispanic, and you can look at all the data at your leisure, but Hispanic and not Hispanic, again, significant, 77.2 versus 43.2. And that kind of holds up to the region and also throughout the United States. There are some differences, but it holds pretty true. Now, disparities in home ownership. Again, U.S. Census American Community Survey, 2008 to 2015. Working age population, 25 to 55, and this is restricted to homeowners. So for male, average home value, 419, 462. Female, pretty close, and actually a little bit higher. So kudos to the women. For race, again, you see this significant disparity. White, 435, Black, 262. I can go more into detail, but you can certainly look at this on your own or contact me if you have questions. For Hispanic and non-Hispanic, 429 versus 330. So statistically significant difference between rates of home ownership for white minorities by both race and ethnicity in all marketplaces. This is, again, another section which I didn't blow out for you, but leave the data for you. And in conclusion, evidence of disparities were found by race, ethnicity, and gender for all the indicators we looked at across the marketplaces. Disparities were generally consistent with existing academic literature and disparity studies from other locations. I appreciate the time that you provided me today. I'd be happy to talk at the end. If there's any questions, I'll stay on after the other speakers. You can find these reports online for the Academy. As Jean had mentioned, there are quite a few reports on there. If you have a hard time finding them, or of note, within the next couple of weeks, we're putting up a new website and you wait and you can't find it, just call me. You can reach me. Best number right now is by my cell phone. And I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Terry. Provides some great data and insights to what Connecticut's facing in approaching some equitable and affordable housing going forward. Our next speaker is Carlos Esquera from Connecticut DEP. The issue of wastewater in housing is another hot topic that we decided to include. In my work as a regional planner, in the communities that I worked in as a regional planner, it was never a number of issues came up about wastewater, and it's fairly common in Connecticut about the issues of, there's sewer and infrastructure, and then there's the issues of decentralized systems. And it's a difficult topic, and it's one that we have to keep an open mind when we're talking about housing, because wastewater is an exact science, and yet the landscape on which we placed wastewater, whether it's decentralized systems or centralized systems, is varied. I know of several cases, one in my hometown, where it was impossible to find suitable soils for a large decentralized system to take care of the village, and the current decentralized system in the hometown that I live in was failing, and they needed to decide whether to go with sewer or a decentralized system. And the community, a number of people in the community, were pushing for a decentralized system, and some people were pushing for sewer. So it was a complicated process that took about 3 years. So I think when we're talking about planning, we have to keep an open mind, planning for housing, planning in communities, keep an open mind as to the time that it takes to discuss and analyze sewer and wastewater issues. And when we were looking for a speaker, Carlos was presented to me by some people in the industry as the person to go to. So Carlos works as a sanitary engineer in the municipal facilities section for the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. He administers the Premier Funding Assistance Program in the state for municipal wastewater infrastructure, as well as issues permits and enforces regulations applicable to private and public facilities that collect, treat, and discharge wastewaters into the surface waters of Connecticut. He's originally from Bogota, Colombia, where he received a bachelor's degree in civil engineering and later obtained a master's degree from the University of Hartford in West Hartford in environmental engineering. And he's been working for 14 years for the state of Connecticut, doing a great job from what I hear from people in the industry, and 10 of which are working with the EP's municipal facilities section. Carlos, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Okay, Rebecca, thank you for that introduction. That was very detailed, and I appreciate your introduction. Let me share the screen right now. Okay, I don't know if you folks can see the screen right now. Please let me know. Let me know if you do.
Screen is up.
Okay, thank you, Rebecca. Okay, good morning, everybody. So again, thank you, Rebecca, for that introduction. My name is Carlos Esguerra. Like Rebecca mentioned, I've been working for the state for the last 14 years. Initially in 2007, I used to work for the Office of Long Island Sound Programs as a, issuing permits for coastal facilities. And since the year 2011, I joined the Municipal Facilities Group with Connecticut DEP, where essentially we regulate municipal wastewater infrastructure in Connecticut. And I will provide some regulatory background as to what is our authority to regulate these facilities. Okay, so the program that I work for, essentially the regulatory authority comes from the Clean Water Act that was enacted back in the 1970s, 1972. And the Clean Water Act, under the Clean Water Act, we have the National Pollutant Elimination System, or NEPTIS program. Under that program, you have several categories of different programmatic sections that are under that authority. And the category that I work for with the Municipal Wastewater Group is essentially that regulates municipal wastewater discharges. We have the stormwater discharges, like the MS4 program, or construction discharges, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with. We also have industrial wastewater discharges, and we have the pretreatment program, all of which are essentially under the umbrella of the NEPTIS program, National NEPTIS program. Connecticut is a delegated state when it comes to the implementation of the NEPTIS program. Connecticut has had the delegation since the late 1970s. Okay, moving on. Okay, so the Municipal Facilities Program at Connecticut DEP, essentially we wear three hats. One of the hats is to administer the Clean Water Fund program. Other states, they call it the State Revolving Fund. And as Rebecca mentioned, this is essentially the primary funding assistance program in Connecticut for municipal wastewater infrastructure projects. Some of the categories that we have, are combined sewer overflows. In Connecticut, we have 4 communities that have combined sewer overflows and regulators. Essentially, when they have heavy rain events, some of the systems have to release sewage into receiving streams. So the other programs that we administer are nutrient removal. So essentially, we administer programs, planning, design, and construction projects for the removal of nitrogen and phosphorus. We also have another project that was done throughout the course of many, many years for the upgrade of substandard septic systems in the town of Old Saybrook. That project is still ongoing. We have also another category of projects that are for the removal of infiltration and inflow, which are essentially any external sources of water that entered the sanitary collection system, and essentially what they cost, they surcharge the system. So they essentially cause bypasses of raw sewage within collection systems. So that's also one of the categories that we work for. Pump station upgrades and resiliency projects. This is something that has really become an issue or has come to the forefront related to resiliency of projects. Sea level rise, climate change certainly has been something that is being in our radar for the last 5 or 6 years. And that's something that we're currently working on when it comes to wastewater infrastructure. And as Rebecca mentioned also, we also have funding opportunities for certain projects that are dealing with community pollution problems related to septic systems. Like the case of Old Saybrook, several years ago, they adopted a program where they're actually upgrading septic systems within the wastewater management district that they created. And other options could include the extension of sanitary sewers to essentially abandon the septic systems and collect the wastewater and take it to an offsite location for treatment and disposal. Okay, the other hat that we wear is essentially related to the issuance of permits for domestic wastewater. And we also enforce the regulations whenever there's any violations of the Clean Water Act, water quality standards in Connecticut. We can enforce those requirements. All right, just to give you a sort of like a general idea of what we have in Connecticut as far as wastewater infrastructure. In Connecticut, we have about 94 facilities that are regulated by the Municipal Facilities Program. We have 45 municipalities that operate a tributary wastewater collection system. So what those systems are essentially are communities that don't have a treatment facility within the boundaries of the municipality, but they have some form of intermunicipal agreement or a contract with the receiving community to essentially discharge the wastewater into that community. We have about 10,000 miles of municipal sewers in the state. We have 240 large pump stations that can pump over 500,000 gallons per day of wastewater. And we have about 800 small pump stations that are less than 500,000 gallons. And like I mentioned before, we have 4 combined sewer overflow communities in Connecticut. Okay, I just wanted to kind of go over some of the main components of a wastewater system. So we have two components to every system. Essentially, we have the collection system component, and then we have the treatment system component. When it comes to the collection system part of it, you can have either a collection system that operates through gravity, so essentially the wastewater flows by gravity, or you can also have sections of collection systems that are operated, are pressurized. In that diagram that I have there, that is very simplistic, essentially shows the gravity flow down to the low-lying area where you might have a pump station. The pump station can actually pump it to another area, and then it can flow by gravity or by pressure to the receiving wastewater treatment plant, where the wastewater essentially is treated to meet the requirements in the permit before it is discharged into the receiving stream. Okay, here's just a quick aerial view of a typical wastewater treatment facility in Connecticut. This facility right here is the facility in Glastonbury. We have the different components there. We have the influent, where essentially it receives some primary treatment. Then it goes to a biological treatment in the aeration tanks. And essentially that's where all the organic matter is flocculated and removed out of suspension. And then in Connecticut, all those facilities that are located north of the highway I-95 have to perform seasonal disinfection, typically from May 1st through September 30th, because of the recreational use, the rivers, people boating or swimming or fishing. So they have to perform seasonal disinfection. For facilities that are located south of I-95, those facilities have to perform year-round disinfection. And the reason is because of the shellfish resources, commercial shellfishing that is located in those areas. So to make sure that bacteria is under control, at least from the discharges from municipal wastewater treatment plants. All right, I just wanted to talk about some of the issues that collection systems in Connecticut or anywhere for that matter typically have. So the issue of fats, oil, and grease, essentially those communities that have a lot of restaurants or, can discharge a lot of fats and oils into the sewer system, and that they can lead to clogs in the system. We also have in Connecticut an issue right now with wipes, a lot of people, flushing wipes down the sewer system, which can lead to clogs in the system and bypasses. We also have issues with pipe corrosion. Some of the older collection systems that, have been in operation for many years, they can be prone to having corrosion issues because of the hydrogen sulfide. Some of the organic matter in the system can create those gases, and when they combine with the water, they can lead to corrosive conditions in the system, which can lead to collapses of pipes or a lot of operational issues. We also have the issue of infiltration. Essentially, when some of the older systems that have a lot of clay pipe, you can have a lot of cracks in the system that can essentially be sources of external water, groundwater, rainwater entering the system and leading to surcharges of the system. Okay, regarding the issue of resiliency, I just wanted to present this quick slide here to show, what are some of the issues that wastewater infrastructure is vulnerable to. As some of you may remember, in the year 2012, we have Superstorm Sandy. Essentially, right after Sandy hit, we had about 45 wastewater treatment plants that lost power, and about 300 pump stations that lost power. And you can see the graph on the right-hand side of the screen, essentially kind of like showing throughout time the amount of time that it took to recover commercial power for those facilities. On the left-hand side, we have a storm that hit Stafford Springs in 2005. Essentially, that community received 13 inches of rain in the course of a few days. The Willimantic River overflowed and essentially flooded out the facility. Essentially, they had to abandon and wait for the waters to recede, and then pretty much start the system again. So those are some of the challenges that we have with wastewater infrastructure. The program that I work for, essentially, as I mentioned before, provides funding for municipal wastewater infrastructure. Essentially, we have on the right-hand side of the screen, we have about 93% of the funds that we get comes from the state funds, and 7% of the grants are from EPA. It's a cap grant of about 7%. We provide funding for several phases of a project. So the initial phase of any project is going to be creating a concept, which is called a planning phase or conceptual phase. And for that, we have a 55% grant, no loan, and that grant is available on a first come, first serve basis. If the conceptual phase generates a project that is feasible, then the next phases are design and construction. And for CSO projects, we have a 50% grant. For nutrient removal, for phosphorus or nitrogen removal, we have a 30% grant. Smaller communities such as Old Saybrook or communities that don't have sewer infrastructure and that meet the statutory definition of a small community, we have a grant of 25%. Collection systems and resiliency can get a grant percentage of about 20%. And for those projects that get a grant, the balance, the loan can be financed at 2% per year for 20 years for eligible costs. All right, how can communities qualify for the funding? One of the primary steps is for the community to procure the services of the engineer through the QBS process, which is the qualification-based selection process. That is one of the key first steps that any community needs to follow in order to qualify for the funding, is to demonstrate compliance with the QBS. It's not only a state requirement, but it's also an EPA requirement. We would have to review the scope of work, the level of effort, and the fee. How much is this going to cost? And we would have to review and pre-approve that scope of work. Then the community submits a Clean Water Fund application, and then at the end of that process, there's an agreement that is executed between the community and the state, and essentially the state can actually start dispersing the funds. One thing that I want to mention is the community has to appropriate the funding for the project. So typically, we ask communities to appropriate 100% of the cost of the project without taking into account the grant that they're supposed to get. That's one of the requirements of the Clean Water Fund program. Okay, now I just wanted to talk about water pollution control authorities. And this is how wastewater is managed at the local level. All right, so Chapter 103 of the Connecticut General Statutes, Sections 7-245 through 273-A, and it essentially enables municipalities to create water pollution control authorities, and essentially provide some powers and duties that can be followed by WPCAs. I listed only a few samples here of some of the powers that WPCAs have. They can acquire, construct, and operate the wastewater system. They can establish and revise rules and regulations for the supervision, management, control, and operation. They can also establish budgets and the user rates for communities to operate the wastewater management system and the use of the wastewater system as well. Okay, when it comes to management, and this is certainly something that there is a common denominator, or there is definitely some connection with planning, is the creation of a sewer service area map. WPCAs are authorized to prepare a water pollution control plan, also known as wastewater facilities plan. And such plans should typically designate or delineate the boundaries of areas that are connected to the sanitary sewer, areas where sanitary sewers are planned or anticipated, areas where sanitary sewers are going to be avoided, and also areas of municipalities that may have a community wastewater system. Not all communities have a community system, but the ones that do should identify that in the SSCA map. All right, to the right-hand side, I have the SSCA map for the city of Stamford, showing all the different colors and all the different areas identified. And actually, in the next slide, I have a snapshot of the town of South Windsor sanitary sewer service area. We can see in this map sort of like where the wastewater infrastructure currently is, what are some future sewer connections, some of the properties that are designated for future connection, the properties that are currently connected, and what are those areas in town that are not going to be connected to sewers for either conservation or other reasons. The reason why I wanted to bring this up at this forum is because we always encourage communities, WPCA, to have close coordination with the planning and zoning boards to make sure that those sewer service areas are planned and administered and managed with input from not only the WPCA, but also from the planning and zoning boards of any community. That's the reason why I thought this is certainly something that we always encourage communities to coordinate as much as possible. All right. When it comes to projects, we always, the Connecticut DEP, whenever we sponsor either a design construction projects that is over $200,000 in cost, we have to comply with the Connecticut Environmental Policy Act. And a subset of that CCAPA process is establishing consistency between the local POCD, Plan of Conservation and Development, and the state POCD. Okay, so essentially the CCAPA process is an environmental assessment that we do of projects, to establish socioeconomic impacts, consistency between the local and state POCD, impacts on natural resources, wildlife. So these are very thorough assessments that are done of some of the projects that we do. Not every project rises to the level of having to go through a CCAPA screening process. Some of the more straightforward projects don't need to follow that, but for instance, a sewer extension to an area that doesn't have sewers, that's the kind of project that typically would go through a CCAPA assessment. And the reason why that is because there is always a lot of concern how sewers may induce growth or may generate development in areas that the town does not want to see development, or how those sewers may impact areas that are for conservation. So typically sewer extensions are the kind of projects that are always receive a lot of scrutiny, not only from the state, but from also private citizens. And this is where it is also extremely important for local communities to have a strong POCD plan. I don't know, some of you might know, but after the year 2016, every community in Connecticut has to adopt a updated POCD in order to be eligible for funding from the Clean Water Fund program. That needs to happen every 10 years, and the state can actually deny the funding if the POCD is not updated. That's under Clean Water Connecticut General Statute Section 8-23. So, it is important to have those POCDs updated about every 10 years. And in those POCDs, it's always important to show kind of like what are the areas that are slated for sewers or for not sewers. So always identify those areas in your plans so that are more easier to work with when the time comes for working on any wastewater management projects. Okay, I'm almost approaching the end here. I just wanted to show an aerial photo of one of the projects that I'm currently working on. This is the city of Meriden. They're currently updating the facility for phosphorus removal. The project is expected to be completed by the end of this year. And the Quinnipiac River is on the right-hand side of the screen. And this is a project that is currently being funded by the Clean Water Fund program. It is about $42 million, including engineering and construction. And like I mentioned before, they're right on track of meeting the scheduled completion date of the end of this year. And with that, this is all I had to share. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present, and have a good weekend.
Thank you, Carlos. That was a terrific overview of the process. It really gives the perspective that we need, as when we're looking at housing, we need to start, we need to take the long game, and we need to start early. I love the references to the Plan of Conservation and Development. Our next speaker is going to, I'm going to ask you to broaden your mind on the same level as looking at planning for wastewater, is looking at the, there's a reason this is called From the Ground Up. Let's look under the ground, not only in wastewater, but in the environment. So from the standpoint of the environment, often the environment and wastewater can be perceived as a NIMBYism for housing issues or avoiding diversity and equity in a community and becoming inclusionary. But sometimes, and that's what we have to plan for. We have to plan for it so we're ready to answer those questions. And our next speaker, Denise Savageau, is going to take you on a tour of looking at the elements of the environment that are important with regard to housing and environmental justice. And speaking to a personal situation, when I was the director of planning in East Lyme, it kind of links both of these speakers together. Worked very closely with the POCD, wrote the POCD, worked very closely with the Public Works Department and the facilities plan and water plan. They had just been mandated to introduce sewer into the community. And what ended up happening was that the sewer planning went to such a robust level that they started to deplete their aquifers, and it started impacting the watershed. And they built a lot of housing, but they ultimately had to end up connecting to the New London water system. That was after I left, but there was a constant issue of the balance under the ground between the resources that are available to support what's on the land. Denise has a robust knowledge of environmental issues in Connecticut. She has a lot of experience reckoning with the intersection between development and land use and environmental regulation. She's worked in the field for over 30 years, 20 years as conservation director for the town of Greenwich until her retirement in 2018. And during her tenure in Greenwich, she worked closely with the other land use departments. She reviewed proposed development plans, worked with the POCD, looked at the intersections of environmental impacts, and assisted with development and implementation of the POCD, as well as a hazard mitigation plan. She was also a member of the Emergency Operations Center during major storm events, including Superstorm Sandy. In retirement, she's now local in the Connecticut River Valley, and very active at the her local level, regional level, state, and national as a volunteer, working on issues regarding soil and water conservation. And she's currently the chair, and a very active chair because I work with her in my capacity in my job as the chair of the Connecticut Council on Soil and Water Conservation, working in soil health, watershed management, water quality. And so, Denise, we're looking forward to this presentation and keeping environmental justice on a number of levels in the forefront of planners' minds. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Jean, for that introduction and for setting this up. And when you asked me to do this presentation, I was like, oh, like minds, because there's a lot of discussion on, when we're looking at land use. And there's some tension there, as has been mentioned. There's tension even within land use departments. What's good for planning and zoning? Is that also good for wetlands? And how do we balance all of these? And then when we start taking in social justice and environmental justice issues, it just complicates the message further. So I appreciated doing this, and I've been thinking about this for a while. As you mentioned, I worked for 20 years in Hartford County, but prior to that, I worked, 20 years in the town of Greenwich. But prior to that, I worked in Hartford County, and particularly did work with the city of Hartford and served on the first environmental justice board there. So very familiar with some of the issues that we're going to be talking about today. So as I started researching this after you asked me, I started saying okay, I've been working on this for a long time, and is there a name for what I want? And indeed, I found out that there was, just sustainability. So let's talk about that a little bit. One of the things we're talking about when we talk about, the different topics is, especially when we talk about housing and affordable housing in particular, we need to look at the social justice issues, the housing, the economic opportunities. They're all listed here. And I think, one of the top things we talk about, of course, is public health, the health of the community and what we expose folks to. So those are a lot of times the social justice issues that we're dealing with. And then we have the environmental justice issues, environmental quality. We talk about air quality in our cities and water quality. And but we also talk about things like food security, access to open space, natural hazard prevention. So we need to balance all of these. And one of the things, and it's not always easy. I think folks who know that, when we're working on this, there's some real challenges. So when we're talking about affordable housing, we a lot of times think like, oh, there's some, how are we going to accomplish that? And where are we going to put affordable housing? And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in some of these slides. But when you do the two of these together, it's what people are referring to as just sustainability. And that's balancing the social and environmental justice for sustainable communities. We want to get to sustainable and resilient communities, whether, no matter which town you're in, no matter which city you're in, and as a state. So how do we do this? And how do we make sure that we're not just talking about this? And the reason that this is of interest to me, and why when Jean brought this up, is there's been a real attack on environmental regulations as being a burden for putting in affordable housing. And I think we really need to take a deep dive and look at that. And hopefully that's some of what I will be bringing up today. So just quickly, there's a lot of work that's out there on just sustainabilities. And Robert Bullard, who's the author here, or one of the co-authors here on just sustainabilities, is probably the father of environmental justice and is recognized in the United States. And Julian Agerman, he's the person who has really kind of coined this phrase of just sustainabilities. But we're seeing that across the board. And I wanted to just quickly talk about this because this has been somewhat my experience. And we all have different experiences as planners, but working in, like I said, a very diverse county like Hartford County, and then moving to, working in Fairfield County in Greenwich, I've really seen a lot of different things happening. And one of the things that's interesting is especially when we're talking about land use regulations, is we kind of have the civil rights group, and I would say that's the folks talking about affordable housing. And then we have the women's group, and then we have the environmental groups, and they're all one group, because eventually, if we don't have clean air, if we don't have water, if we don't have, if we don't have anything to eat, and we know that during the pandemic, it exposed this issue of food insecurity in our state like never before. We really need to think about that when we're talking about housing. We need to think about it collectively, so that we should not be pitting the environmental sector against the folks who are looking at housing. We need to be looking at this collectively. How do we do that? And I think actually the Sustainable Connecticut program is doing a great job trying to merge those issues of that. We need to look at it collectively. So this idea, again, of just sustainability kind of marries these two topics. So just a quick, and everyone here who's a planner knows this is what we do every day, whether it be in environmental planning or urban planning, or however you put yourself in the planning perspective. We deal with land use regulations, planning and zoning, inland wetlands, tidal wetlands, state level stormwater permitting. There's a host of environmental and land use regulations that we look at. And basically, the overall mission of that is to balance private property with the public good. Because people have private property rights. And of course, that really, where our law is based on, old England, where people didn't own properties. And so it was a big deal to have property ownership when we first came to the United States. So we have this real vested interest in having private properties and private property ownership. But one of the things that we realize is we also need to look at what's the public good? Can you just do anything on your property when obviously it impacts people downstream and upstream and wherever? So we need to really take a look at that. And that's what land use regulations do. They provide for not only, the public good, but we need to think about the public good as being the health, well-being, and safety of the residents in a particular community. And when I talk about the public good, I also want to talk about those ecosystem services that make sure that our cities are sustainable. So we are balancing all of that. It's not just about the public good or the public trust in terms of, some existential environmental considerations, but that they're really valuable in terms of, particularly when talking about some of those social justice issues of housing and human health, and then looking at the environmental justice issues as well. So this is my reality, or what I feel is the reality, and what I've been dealing with. And the urban myth is that we've been looking at development costs associated with land use development regulations prevent the development of affordable housing. And I have heard that so many times. And not just affordable housing, but development in general. There's a real attack on land use regulations. I think we can all agree that regulations can always be made better. We do know that there's some zoning challenges that we need to look at, but when we look at it, we cannot then just dismiss environmental regulations out of hand. And, sometimes we talk about things as of right, and it's like, well, when do we want to do things as of right? Because we have that private properties. We know that we balance land use regulations with private property rights, which is the as of right. And how do we maintain that balance without losing the importance of what we're trying to gain and that protection of the public trust and the ecosystem services? So I look at this, and my background and my training from a academic perspective is as an environmental economist. And so when I look at that, I say, it's only the development cost to the developer, but what about the environmental costs? And we'll talk a little bit more about that balance. But the urban truth, or I should say, the balance is the urban truth. And that's, we undervalue external costs associated with loss of ecosystem service and the degradation of environmental quality when we have uncontrolled development. And we really need to be balancing this. So this scale here is showing that this is how we put more value on monetary and not as much value on those ecosystem services. And that creates a problem and a tension for us. So I just want to go through 3 scenarios just to raise a lot of questions about how we need to balance this and some of the challenges, and sometimes how we make it oversimplified about what we need to do. And I did this in the context of climate change because it's something we're all putting into the mix now. So I want to talk a little bit about increased flooding, extreme heat, and food security, things that are coming up that are really tied to affordable housing as well. So who gets to live at the top of the hill? Well, we're talking about flood mitigation and natural hazards. We're looking at what we need to do for sustainability and what we're going to do for environmental justice. And one of the things across the United States is we're finding that more and more of our affordable housing is being placed in floodplains. And one of the reasons is because that is the cheapest land, and land that's affordable. So what I want to make sure people understand is that flood mitigation equity is more than just meeting the base flood elevation. And when you work in an emergency operations center during storms like Sandy, but also during some of the flooding that we've had in southwestern Connecticut and, well, across the state, but a couple of years ago, we had a lot of riverine flooding in southwestern Connecticut. And when you look at that in the context of environmental justice, you cannot just look at base flood elevation. Just elevating homes does not take care of the challenges. That's an economic. We're making sure the house is protected, but there's more going on there than what's going on. When we think about environmental justice, a lot of times we think about the idea of we're bringing the nuisance, we're placing let's say the combustion plant for waste products in the inner city. We're putting a highway through a neighborhood. We're putting the landfill in a neighborhood. We're always thinking about that. We're bringing the nuisance to the people. But when we're looking at flooding and where we're locating houses, are we bringing the people up the nuisance? Again, who gets to live at the top of the hill? Why are we always looking at the lowest price land with the most, that is most sensitive environmentally, and when we're looking at natural hazards, create some of the most natural hazards with the people who are the most vulnerable? So we need to look at some of these issues I brought up here. FEMA maps don't always account for climate change. So if we're just relying on FEMA maps and we're looking at base flood elevations, we have some challenges. When we're putting vulnerable communities that are trying to be homeowners and we're bringing them to the nuisance and saying, oh, we'll put our affordable housing on this cheap land, and we'll say, oh, you know what, let's make sure that because of affordable housing, we will look at, waiving environmental regulations, or saying, oh, as long as we elevate the homes, everything's fine. But then we have now we have the burden of health insurance. Anyone who worked in an emergency operations center knows that when you elevate a home because it's going to flood, they still have to evacuate during an emergency. So now we have our most vulnerable communities that need to evacuate. They can't afford to go to a hotel. They may not have relatives where they can go to. We need to be thinking about what they do during major storm events. In loss of utilities, particularly in coastal areas, we automatically shut off when you're in an emergency operations center. We automatically shut off your utilities. Your electric goes out, your gas goes out. So you all of a sudden need to be dealing with that. And those might be shut off for a couple of days after a major storm event, not because of power outages, just because until everything is restored, the gas and lights are not going to be coming on in a coastal community where you're having coastal surges. The cleanup of debris after storm events, that cost of debris removal. Now we're putting that burden on these owners. And then elevated structures. These are elevated structures, not necessarily with elevators in them, because those would be challenging in a flood zone that's going to be flooding, particularly from a coastal flooding. So who was left out? Can we age in place? If you're going to buy a home, can you age in place? If you are now looking at a house that's elevated to, base flood elevation 16 or 17 or 18 feet, base flood elevation, so are we now limiting who can be in those areas? And I don't want to talk, it's not just about coastal, it's also about riverine flooding. When we're putting people in floodplains or close to wetlands, it's like and a lot of times we're saying like, oh, well, we're going to handle this by not having a basement. Now we're going to have slabs, or we're going to do some other things because they have, wet soils. And we've got mold and mildew problems with people who are going to have to use dehumidifiers, a real problem. So there's lots of things. And then, of course, just the loss of ecosystem service. And one of the things we really need to think about is the gentrification after major storm events. And there's a real challenges with that. We see that happening is that all of a sudden now we've got homes with severe damage. And the folks who are the most vulnerable, if they have severe damage, how can they recuperate? And we have major gentrification, after storm events. So just wanted to touch base on that, because gentrification is a real problem when we talk about environmental. Just going to go through the next couple of slides really quick, because I know we've got a time thing. Extreme heat is another one of those. So again, heat islands are exacerbated in our cities, poor air quality days. We've got drought we're looking at. We've got algal blooms in our public drinking water supplies. The incidence of asthma and health issues go up with these extreme heat days, as well as utility bills. So we really need to look at extreme heat when we're talking about housing and where we're going to replace housing. And again, what's the just sustainability solutions? A lot of times they're nature-based. We need forests. We need trees. So we're looking at no net loss of forest. We're looking at source water protection. So we want to make sure that we're looking at this across our landscapes. We need to improve soil health across landscapes to better, handle what's going on in terms of pollutants in our public drinking water supply, to make us more resilient in terms of food production with the heat. So we're looking at all of these. And the reason I want to bring this up when we're talking about this in terms of affordable housing is a lot of times we're saying like, oh, we've got affordable housing. Well, let's allow a density. Well, so are we making sure that we have those green spaces in our affordable housing communities when we're dealing with extreme heat. So we really want to be thinking again about making sure that we don't undermine our environmental regulations that are asking for open space, that are asking for treescapes, that are looking at improving soils when we're dealing with affordable housing. And I just want to put out that we need to do distributed generation of electricity in cities and do community solar. And instead of, for example, using our prime farmland or using our cutting down forests. And I also want to just point out that we tend to say, like, this is happening in the city and this is in the rural areas. And I want to point out that when we're preserving open space, across the board, open space benefits not just the city or the town where people are living. It benefits us all from an air quality perspective, from a water quality perspective. We need to be thinking about this rural urban interface and not segregating so much. And then my last example is food security and land use. And this became a big issue. And people don't really understand the economics of cheap food that came about after World War II with what was called at that time the Green Revolution, and what it allowed us to do with this sudden increase in ag production. And instead of having to spend money on food, we spent money on housing. So this really raised the price of housing because people could afford to spend their disposable income on housing. So we have this connection inherently between housing. Now, as we're facing food scarcity, because for a whole host of reasons, we're looking at food prices increasing. And not only that, we're looking at this loss of local and regional farms, and we need to bring those back and make sure that we're protecting those, because that's where we're going to get good, healthy, nutritious food rather than looking at the global scale. And I want to think about where most of our vegetables come from. If you're looking at your vegetables in whatever, Florida, California, and of course in the wintertime, South America. But we're really looking at, if that's where most of our vegetables are coming from, and we're not protecting our local food sources as a region, that's a problem for us. So we need to think about that from an affordable housing and food security. We do know that people who have secure housing also are more likely to be food secure. So it's one more reason that, okay, if we can have good affordable housing, we can have people who are more food secure, but we also need to look again at that interface between the rural and city, our rural and urban areas. Urban agriculture is a great tool, and we need to have more of that, but we need to make sure that we understand that we're not going to feed our cities just by urban agriculture. We need to look at bigger food systems that are local and regional to accomplish this. So let me wrap up with a last slide, because one of the things we were talking about, and I started with, was that there was this imbalance when we look at sustainability and when we're looking at environment, any kind of development, particularly affordable housing, that it's all about this cash value here, and that the land use regulations are a problem. And I'm suggesting that we don't necessarily need to change land use regulations whole scale to do affordable housing, although there's certain things that obviously can be changed. Like I said, there's always room for improvement when you're looking at the regulatory process. But we also need to look at different economic models. And one of the models I want to put out there that is being used across the country, in the United States, as well as in Europe, are B corporations. And most folks understand B corporations. They're nonprofit entities that adopt a mission that includes social justice and sustainability. And most people know that Ben and Jerry's is there. And they create a public-private partnership model that has the potential to bring just sustainable, because they will look at not just providing affordable housing, but looking at doing it sustainably. And that's what we need. So I'm going to wrap up. I know we're going to delay questions, so I'll turn it back over to you, Jean.
Thank you, Denise. we're definitely getting the larger perspective, and it really your presentation really gave us an overview of the items and the issues that, again, we need to be thinking about in the long term as we plan for housing and how to make it work in Connecticut in an equitable and sustainable way. Toward that end, our next speaker, Michelle Reardon-Nold, is the executive director of the Connecticut Data Collaborative. We a lot of, as you can see, there's kind of a theme going here on this particular this session of this workshop. It's definitely science-based and data-based, and there's a lot of science and data that's got to be put into place and to match up with the built environment that we seek to foster. So Michelle is it's an organization. Connecticut Data Collaborative is an organization striving for informed decision making across Connecticut. I love going to their website and trying to look for all sorts of answers to questions that I have. It empowers an ecosystem of data users by democratizing access to public data and building data literacy. As executive director, and I'm so impressed by this, Michelle helps the organization realize its mission through the implementation of the work. And she has a background in math and public policy, and more importantly, she's built the organization from one full-time staff person to 6.5 staff, and has created and developed new service offerings, including the Connecticut Data Academy, workshops to increase data literacy skills, and data strategic planning, which aligns the collection and use of data to organizations' goals, and the measurement outcomes and the skill sets that are needed. Michelle, take it away.
Great, thank you so much. So I will jump over my slides because you gave me a nice, a couple of my slides because you talked about our mission. So thank you so much, democratizing access to public data, and then some of the services we provide. So let's dive right into the data, housing data. So I'm going to highlight, some of the housing data, but it's all available on our website, and encourage you all to take a look at it. So we've done several housing data related projects. The housing data profiles were released last year, end of last year, with the Partnership for Strong Communities. So we redesigned them, and I'll show you some of the data that's on there. We worked on the zoning atlas with Desegregate Connecticut, which was released in January. We help Open Communities Alliance with their opportunity mapping portal. And then on our website, we have housing data. So let's dive in and I'll show you. So I'm going to start with the housing profiles. So the data in the profiles covers 3 topics for this year anyway: housing, affordability, and population. So, and on the right-hand side of the screen, I included some of the indicators that are included. As you can see, it's a wide variety of indicators on the profiles. So here's just a screenshot of what it looks like, what the data looks like. We try at CT Data to make data accessible, so not just available, but to put it into tables, charts, visualizations that enable users to understand the data, a broader audience to understand the data. So these are this is looking at units in a structure, and then you're comparing Woodbridge to New Haven County to Connecticut as a whole. And here's the website I provided at the bottom where you can dig in. Here's just another example, and I am trying to speed through because I see we have 10 minutes left. But here's just
You're okay,
some more.
Michelle. We can run
okay.
over a little bit.
Okay, all right. Here's some more data to understand housing stock. And so what you can do with the new version of the profiles is you can compare geographies. So you can select all towns or any towns that you're interested in, county, and then Connecticut for comparison. And then we also offer the ability to download a PDF report for one particular town. So, and also for the county. So we have county and town level PDF profiles with the data. And here's what a printable profile looks like. So this is for Woodbridge. We present some key findings. And And then there's several pages of the data as well, which here's, another page which shows population. And so we try and highlight some of the numbers along with providing the charts and graphs to depict the information. For the zoning atlas that we worked on with Desegregate Connecticut, again, I'm sure hopefully you all are familiar with this already, but this provides, this is the first ever, and for Connecticut, and as I understand, for the first ever in the nation, all zoning, 2,600 plus zoning districts in the state were put together, aggregated into one map, and so you can, and it's interactive. You can select different attributes of the zoning district on the right-hand side, and then it'll display the information on the right on the map. You can zoom in, so you can just look at a particular town, particular area of a town, and then the color coding represents the different types of zoning districts. So, and this information is useful, is particularly because there's federal funding and changes to encourage looking at areas that have had discriminatory zoning practices and making changes. So encourage everyone to explore that. And then our open, work with Open Communities Alliance, we've helped them to put together their different maps that they offer. So their opportunity mapping tool, the mobility app to help people with housing vouchers find housing, and then their health disparities map. So just looking at the relationship of different health indicators in housing. So we also have other housing data that we put on our main site, ctdata.org. I'm sorry, I'm doing the housing data story. So this is something that we've put out that we looked at the relationship between health and housing in Hartford. We had a project that was funded by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. And so we created indices to capture health in the city of Hartford. And then we also looked at what was the relationship between foreclosures and evictions. And we did here's just a hotspot map looking at foreclosures in Hartford. And what we found was that the relationship between poor health and areas of higher foreclosure rates was significant. We didn't find it so much in evictions, but we think that's largely due to the fact that many evictions happen. So the eviction data that's available is whatever happens in the court. And our hypothesis was that many evictions don't go to court. They happen. People get evicted, but it's not recorded, or they leave before they're evicted, or forced out before they're officially evicted. So that might be a reason why we didn't see it with eviction data. But so that's something that we do at the Connecticut Data Collaborative, is not just provide the data, but also try and make sense of the data. And we have, like I was going to talk about, lots more data. So on our website, ctdata.org, if you go up to the data section up at the top of our website, you'll see a section called Data by Topic. So what we've done is we've organized all of our data sets and other resources that we provide by topic. So we have a housing data section. If you click on that, you'll see the different housing data sets that we have. And then you'll also see projects related to housing down below on the page, which I didn't screenshot in here. You'll see different housing projects that we have as well. So we provide a lot of census data. That's the main source of our data, I'd say, for housing. But also some of the data does come from, there's permit data that's from DECD, and then some other sources of data, state agency data that we provide. So here's, then there's also projects by category if you go on our website. And so here's some, and then we have, of course, have a housing section for those projects. And what you'll see is that, there's many projects that we work on that contain housing data. So the town profiles are a product that is put out by Advanced CT, formerly Connecticut Economic Resource Center. And we help them, we publish those profiles, help collect and publish the profiles for them. And stay tuned because a new and improved version of the town profiles is coming out in June. And so in there, you'll find housing data along with other population economic data. We also have these Connect regional data stories. That data is aggregated by Department of Children and Families regions, but there is housing data in there as well. And in fact, we do pull some data from the Housing Preservation Database and include it in those stories. And then, of course, I mentioned the Partnership for Strong Communities Housing Data Profiles. And this up top, a housing portal, was something we had done a couple of years ago, looking at Zillow data and census data. And then just many, that we just do lots of different projects. And, some of these may or may not be relevant to you. I know it's not just housing data that planners look at, but there's a wealth of information. And I encourage you all to navigate our website. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. And there's my contact information. So happy to answer any questions too, because I know I just sped through that.
No, thank you, Michelle. That was great. It just gives us and encapsulates what's available to everybody. As we're all working toward the common goal of equitable and affordable and sustainable housing in Connecticut. And I put a note into the chat inviting anyone who had questions and answers at this time to just pop those into the question and answer section at the bottom of your screen. So if you hover over the bottom of your screen, there'll be a Q&A, and you can pop questions into there for any of our speakers. With that, I think, let's see, we're closing out this presentation. Everybody's got the, I know.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. Michelle, there was a question that came into the chat about the email address, the best one to use to get to you. I did the info. I sent them info@ctdata.org.
Yeah, that is probably better than my personal email address, because I do have, and that's, we do data helpline. So we'll answer people's questions if they have, quick data questions or need help finding data. So my staff member, my data analyst on the team, Jason, answers those emails, and he's probably much quicker responding than I am. So that's great. info@ctdata works. Yeah.
Okay. I'm not seeing any questions. I think you guys have answered all of everybody's questions, or they have gotten a lot of information. I would love to see a marriage of a lot of the data that was presented, the wastewater data, environmental data into Connecticut Data Collaborative, and I think we're building a robust system. I don't think it can happen fast enough, but I'm just buying a little time for any of you that have questions. But I'm not seeing anything. I have a feeling it's 11:55 and everybody's probably interested in getting to lunch, but does anyone have any questions of each other, of the panelists? Does Denise or Michelle or Carlos or anyone have, Terry, anybody have any questions of each other?
I just wanted to say one thing. Mm-hmm. I saw Michelle's organization when she first started, and she's doing incredible work. So if she reaches out and wants any kind of data, give it to her, because she'll do good stuff with it.
Yeah. Thank you, Terry. And I didn't pay her to say that.
You didn't pay me.
We have some pretty impressive resources in Connecticut, and I'm hoping that all of you who are attending this, that you're seeing the the overall resources that are available for this cross section of discussion that's available in Connecticut. That it's not nothing in planning is ever a simple straight line, but we're hoping to provide you with all the tools in the toolbox. And if there are more, please reach out to the program committee. Evan is going to be taking charge of that, and reach out to the program committee on, we have 2 more sessions for housing to talk about, but if there's anything that we missed, please do, please let us know. So with that, I'm not seeing any questions coming in. So I believe that everybody has you've answered everybody's questions. We do. Will the slides be available? Yes, they will be available. We will collect them and provide them either on the CCAPA website along with the recording of this webinar once we've completed the series. And I think that was a question answered. And anybody else? All righty. Well, okay. I think that is it. Just trying to offer any other. But again, so thank you, everyone. Thank you, all you attendees who are hiding in the background of this screen for attending this session. We appreciate your interest. We're excited about what you take away from this. Please give us feedback. This is a CM accredited work in progress, so that there are credits available. And if anyone would like to do the survey when you enter your credits onto the APA database, please do so. Then we'll get some survey data back on how we're doing with this housing series. So thank you again, everyone. I'm seeing some great work and everybody enjoying the process. So have a great weekend, TGIF to everybody, and look forward to seeing you on June 4th.